This is a comprehensive introduction to the target file. The target file has got a lot of moving parts, and so this is fairly long because it has to talk about all the parts and how they're all interrelated. Here we are in the source file, and there's a pivot table and there's several other worksheets. And what we look at manage tags, you'll see that there are two of them that are selected. There's a range of detail and there's a pivot table selected. When you publish these tagged ranges from the source file, they get put into a intermediary file, which we call a target file, from which all the publishing to Power BI or to whatever dashboarding tool you have gets done. When you go to select the target folder, which is the place where the target file lives, the default, of course, is this files folder. So the source files in a particular folder, and in that same folder will be the target file. It is very possible, and if you choose to do this, to save your target file anywhere. A perfect place would be on a network share. The only problem with putting it on a network share is then everybody who has access to that network share has access to that file. Now, this may be what you want, but you should keep in mind that that is the case. There may be good reasons to save your target file in a SharePoint or a OneDrive folder, either internally or in the cloud. In order to do that, though, you have to realize that you have to do that through synced folders. So if you have synced folders, you can just go right mouse, view online, and it will take you and show you that HTTPS based SharePoint.com or OneDrive folder where your file lives. And this ends up being useful if you want to use Power BI or some other product to sync to your SharePoint folder. At any time when you're in the source file, you can go look at your target file by just clicking Open Target File on the XLPublish ribbon. Before we go on, let's go back to the source file for a minute. There's a very important thing to understand right here. When I opened this target file, I did it by clicking on Open Target File from the XLPublish ribbon in the source file, and it opened the file fine. You can open the file, of course, just within Excel by going File Open, or you can use Window Explorer and just select the file and double-click and open it using the association. Or you can open it from OneDrive or SharePoint in the browser, and that's fine. But if you do ways without opening it from within the source file, then you can look at this file, but you can't do anything to it. Everything is locked down in this file. If, however, you open it from within the source file by going Open Target File, that assumes that you have the source file and that you are okay to open the target file and to make changes to it. Now, most of the time you won't want to change the target file, just use it. But there are certain advanced features that we can apply in the target file that I'm going to be talking about another time that I think you'll find very useful. Those can only be implemented if you do it from within the source file. And of course, there should only be one version of the truth. There should be only one source file. So now we're in the target file. There are multiple tabs across the bottom of a target file. The first three are in every single file. There's an info tab, there's a sandbox tab, there is a log tab, and I'm going to explain them right now. But at the far right, as many as necessary, there are tables, which are the tables that you've exported as tagged objects from your source file. Let's look at info first. The info table is created to show you what data sets are in this file currently, when they were last refreshed, who was the person who refreshed them, what is the source file name, which is the full path to the source file, and what is this file name. Now, you could say, well, why do I need this file name? Well, because when you move upstream from this to Power BI, you can connect to this table and it'll show that this is the file that this information came from, which is good for all kinds of reasons. So every time you change your data by doing a publish, this table info gets updated. The worksheet called Sandbox is where you can, it's like a sandbox. You can play. You can do pivot tables in here with the data that you've published and see whether it is what you want. See if you need to do something more to get the data a little bit fine-tuned, either back in the source file or here in the target file in some cases. We'll talk about that in a second. Log is interesting, and this is a really good example because in developing this, I did a whole bunch of like 77 different publishes. And in fact, it's not different publishes, it's each table that I published, each data set. So it's telling me that at this time I did a publish from this source file and it was successful. And so it keeps up to 1,000 of these. And then after 1,000, it drops the first one. And so it keeps the last 1,000 updates, which is not an unreasonable amount of time, I believe. Now, remember also, every time you do an update, it actually saves a copy of the target file into that zip file as well. So you can go back in time and actually look at the actual zip files that for every time you've published. These tables have multiple components to them, and I'll explain them and I'll explain why they exist. First of all, this cube, for example, this table, cube ptimp table, is the result of our publish of the pivot table. It is a table, obviously, because of the way it's formatted, and it's got the pull downs, the filters, etc., etc. And it has data in it. So one, it is a table. Second of all, it is a range. So it is a named range which you can then access if you're using a product like Tableau, for example, or if you're using a more traditional implementation of Power BI and you want to connect to it using a timed refresh, using OAuth 2, I believe it's called. I don't use it very often because of what I'm going to show you next, but that's how you do that. So it has two choices. So one, you could connect to the worksheet, you can connect to the range name, or you can connect to the table, because the table itself also has a name to it. But this is the big thing. All of these tables are also promoted to the data model. That means that they are up in Power Pivot's data model. And the way that's done, all of this is done is through Power Query, which we'll talk to in a second. But the point I'm making is that this is a data model version of that same exact file. And it has the built-in formula that we created for this complex pivot table cube publication, and that is created by us automatically when you publish. If we go to this one, range imp data, we also automatically create a measure for every numeric field in the data set. It is the data model that we publish to Power BI, so that you're getting a full-featured publication to Power BI, measures, data, and all. What you'll see later on is how you can create your own measures here in the target, although 99% of the time you won't need to, but that is something that you can do. And so that you're doing measures that are related to the result of your publication, not the source of your publication. So if I close out of that and go back to Excel, if I go back to the sandbox, the whole idea behind the sandbox is you can do whatever you want in here. It's wide open. You can type whatever you want. If you were to go to this and try to type over a cell in one of the data sets, I'm typing and nothing's happening. Doesn't like it because we've protected it. If I go to log and try to type something, same thing. I can't change them. The only way they can be changed is through a republish. Now, if I go here, however, I can go to the employee table and I could say by department. Let's use this measure, and you should always use the measures we've created. And there is our total salaries by department. And if I wanted to say by sex, I can add that in. And now what I've done is I've got the result in the target file. It's just a sandbox. It's just so you can say, yeah, this is what I want. And once you start doing extra measures in the target file, you will use this to make sure everything is the way you want. Now, if you leave it here, it'll get saved with the target file. It doesn't hurt anything, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's just here in the target file for you to check out your data and make sure everything is cool. And that is the target file. Now, when I close it, it drops me back to my source file. And so the next time I publish, it will update not just the target file, but this will also update the workspace XLP testing